welcome to this fantastic event. We are very excited for this event. Just a very brief word about the fourth floor. As you know, the fourth floor is a market network. We have just about 800 companies in our ecosystem right now, which we're really excited about. Most of them are startups. They are building out and leveraging their boards, seeking funding. Women and BIPOC-led startups are seeking funding. We have over 1,500 board-ready women that are on the candidate side of our marketplace, and we have 100 investors and/or women-led funds. And everything that we are doing at the fourth floor is designed to get women on boards, for-profit boards, and cap tables while lifting up underrepresented entrepreneurs in order to create wealth and drive systemic change. Also, before we dive in and I hand the stage over to your first presenter, we do just have to say a brief word about UBS, because we could not be more proud or excited for this partnership that we have with UBS, and also the first of its kind fellowship program that we launched this past fall, advancing 170 for-profit board careers for women, and also supporting 50 BIPOC-led pre-seed and seed stage startups. So really, this has just been amazing, and we are deeply appreciative of the partnership. We also just need, to be clear that UBS really from the very beginning understood and supported the unique vision that we have at the fourth floor. And also they believe in taking actionable steps to drive change. So having partners like UBS who are truly committed to DE&I and to underrepresented founders, really it's everything in this landscape. I think most of us know that. And so really good. Things are always, if we've learned nothing in the last few weeks, things are always uncertain all the time. It's really wonderful to have great partners. So thank you, UBS. Now it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you, Isabel, to join me here in the spotlight. Isabel Oropeza, who is a project manager with the Women's Strategic Client segment at UBS. She is going to properly introduce herself and also speak for a few minutes about UBS's Own Your Worth. And then when Isabel is done, we will then turn it over to the panelists. So to address the conversation about exiting. So just want to make sure everyone knows that's how this will play out. So without further ado, Isabel, welcome.
Thank you, Bree, and thank you so much for such a kind introduction. I just want to say hi to everybody and welcome to our virtual session today, Owning Your Worth, Growing Your Business with the End in Mind. Like Bree mentioned, we're going to kick it off with a brief overview of our latest Own Your Worth research, and then we will transition into our panel discussion. So the title of our latest Own Your Worth report is Women on Purpose, Values, Money, and the Pursuit of More Intentional Lives, which I certainly find particularly relevant for this audience, and I hope you do too. Let's dig into the latest research and its implications for you, your family, your business, and your life more broadly. Over the last 5 years, UBS has sought to understand the different ways in which women's financial lives may be impacted differently than their male counterparts, and how women approach the major financial decisions that have a profound impact on their financial and overall well-being. We have done this through our Own Your Worth research, which many of you may already be familiar with. We've explored financial decision-making trends amongst women, as well as other demographic trends that impact women, including the fact that 8 out of 10 women in the US will end up solely responsible for their financial well-being at some point in their lives. Our goal has been to better understand women as investors and their engagement in the major financial decisions that impact them, their futures, and their families, so that we can then use those findings to develop actionable, tangible ideas, recommendations, and solutions to bring more women to the financial table and support those women who are already at the table. Over the year, we've spoken with thousands of women and men in the US and around the world. We've heard from married women, single women, divorced, widowed, women from all different generations, backgrounds, races, ethnicities, ages, and financial situations. This is part of our foundational approach that women are a population, not a segment. And rather than taking broad brush strokes to the entire population of women, our goal has been to understand specific demographics of women and help meet them where they are on their financial journey. And with each year of new research, we learn something new. The findings from our initial 2018 Own Your Worth survey demonstrated the importance of women taking a seat at the money table. And our latest report highlights women who are really leading the way when it comes to financial participation. Our research has also uncovered that women's financial influence is increasing faster than ever before here in the US and around the world. A report by McKinsey & Company from 2020 found that women's financial clout is also growing. American women controlled 11 trillion in 2020, about a third of all financial assets, and that number is expected to reach 30 trillion by 2030. So women will add almost double of the amount of wealth they controlled over the next decade. And according to Forbes, there are more women billionaires than ever before, and that number grew by over 35% in 2021. So our research from the last 4 years through 2021 looked at this topic of women's financial participation and how we could bring more women to the money table and how we could learn from those women who are actively engaged in their long-term finances. And as we build on that research and sought to evolve it even further in 2022, it became clear that we needed to consider the fundamental changes that have taken place over the last few years. And I think everyone will agree that a lot has happened over the past few years. The pandemic upended so much of our lives, the way we work, the way we spend our time, the way we spend our money, as well as the way we interact with one another. In addition to the pandemic, there has been tremendous economic and geopolitical uncertainty, raising waves of social activism and other important events that are shaping society each and every day. Regardless of your unique situation, each and every one of us have been impacted by the events happening around us in some way, shape, or form. Many of us are still working through what the last few years really mean for the way we live and what's important to us. We're seeing places where we'd like things to be different. We're reassessing our priorities and considering whether to focus our lives to help create a world that's more in line with the one we'd imagine. These events have clearly been a catalyst for reevaluation for all investors, but particularly for women. And that's what our latest research wanted to uncover. That was our hypothesis. And indeed, our latest 2022 Own Your Worth survey showed us that over 80% of women have recently assessed what's important to them because of the events of the last few years. And this reassessment also includes reassessing wealth, financial goals, money, and values. It seems from our research that this convergence of women's growing financial strength with a difficult and turbulent few years have created a remarkable moment in our lives. Women are committing themselves to be the change they want to see in the world. They have told us that they are using their time, money, expertise, and other resources to make a difference for the causes they care about. And almost all see money as a tool to be able to affect that change. This is what Women on Purpose is all about. Our research also showed us that the majority of women believe being involved in long-term financial planning can enable them to make more of an impact. And over 80% believe that they can pursue a more meaningful life without having to sacrifice their own financial well-being. This latest Own Your Worth report is all about how women have recharged their commitment to leading a meaningful life as a result of the last few years. 94% have donated their time or money in the past year. 73% of women are making purchases that align with their values. 79% are interested in ESG investing, and almost 70% are even choosing careers that better align with their values. Our research showed us women everywhere are doing whatever they can to live more intentional and purposeful lives. There are 5 questions we encourage everyone to ask themselves when planning for your future with an intentional approach. What excites you about the future? Who are the people who matter most to you? What impact would you like to have on your loved ones and community? What keeps you up at night? How do you plan to achieve your life's vision? And these are some of the questions that a UBS advisor will ask you when it comes to beginning the conversation around a financial plan for your future and your loved ones. There's no one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to planning, and it really comes down to your unique situation and how you start to think about answering these questions. And as the largest wealth management firm in the world, our goal has been to understand what the commitment to leading a meaningful life means as it pertains to women's financial lives, to business owners, and to startup founders, which is a great segue into our panel discussion for the day. So up next, we'll be speaking with Bianca and Laura, and I'll turn it over to Bree to transition us. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you, Isabel. That was fantastic. And so many of those statistics, it's really inspiring, I think, for the future. And what a great way to set up this panel discussion and foundation. So joining me here in the spotlight, it is my pleasure to welcome Bianca Wood, Executive Director, Field Engagement Manager, UBS Business Owners Client Segment, and Laura Chooljian, Executive Director, Senior Wealth Strategist at UBS, to come join me here in the spotlight. I will be leaving and turning the virtual stage over to the panel to properly introduce themselves and have the discussion we're all here for.
Well,
Thank you, Bree.
Thanks, guys. I can start. I'm happy to start. And just give a little bit on my background and my team within UBS. So very complimentary to Isabel and the Women Segment team. My group actually focuses on the specific wealth management needs that business owners will experience as they are building, growing, and selling their companies. And coming from a 3rd generation business owner family myself, I have a personal understanding of the unique financial needs that owners will face through different stages of growth and exit. Laura, I will pass it over to you to give us a little bit of background on you and advanced planning.
Sure. Thanks so much, Bree, Isabel. I am part of our advanced planning group here at UBS. It's a national group. We're about 35 folks in the group at this point, and hopefully still growing. But I'm a recovering estate planning attorney. I actually started my career as a corporate attorney working with venture-backed companies. So quite familiar with probably some of the experiences that you all are going through, and you've probably spoken hopefully with someone like me at some point, and if not, we're going to talk about today why that might be an important thing to start considering. So we here as a group, we're a second set of eyes. We are no longer practicing, meaning we don't draft documents, but really helping business owners and UBS clients and prospects to start thinking about, early stage planning, whether that's estate planning, income tax planning, and all the way through a liquidity event, an IPO, and then what can we do after the fact to minimize taxes, and more importantly, to help you plan through what's important to your family, what you want to pass down, charitable planning. So a lot of fun topics today, and we're going to dive into them a little bit more. more today.
Awesome. Thank you, Laura and Bianca, for that introduction. From the women's segment perspective, we're focused on supporting women navigating their financial lives and preparing for their financial futures. So with that context, I'd like to just jump into it here and kick it over to Bianca. So Bianca, seeing how your team is committed to understanding and addressing the unique needs of business owners, could you speak on how you've seen our Own Your Worth research reflected in the lives of successful business owners and startup founders your team has worked with?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I will say I love the Own Your Worth message because for me, it's all about showing up. It's about leveraging the firm resources and the insights to help each of us really understand how money and wealth can impact us, and then also how they can potentially help us to achieve some of our longer term goals. And that's really important for business owners and startup founders specifically. And maybe I can take it a little bit from the hypothetical into a little bit more of the personal. I mentioned I'm from a third generation business owner family, but what I didn't address is that my mother actually started her company the year that I was born. So she built a nursery in her warehouse, and that's where I grew up. And from that vantage point, I really did get to see a lot of the ups and downs that come with being a business owner. And one thing that has specifically really always stood out to me is that while she had an extremely successful business, it was very hard for her to sell. And I think that was because she just didn't know that she had to prepare the business to be attractive to potential buyers. And then she also didn't know how to prepare for a sale, that there were certain things you could and should be doing to get a business ready for that transaction. So in our work with business owners and female founders, we've really applied a lot of sort of the Own Your Worth concepts in different ways. Sometimes we're talking to founders like those that you surveyed in your report who really want to prioritize purpose. With their wealth, they want to use their business as a vehicle for impact. And so we have conversations often with owners about marrying purpose with profitability and also providing them with some insights on how impact, missions, purpose-driven goals can really help them to drive enterprise value and do it in a way that makes the business more attractive to potential buyers, to investors, or even helps engage a broader customer base. I think you mentioned 72% of women are looking to align some of their purchasing with their values. So, certainly how can we use this to impact the bottom line? And in some cases, even attract and retain employees, which is really important. And then lastly, I would say a lot of what you talk about with Own Your Worth really comes down to taking every opportunity to take your seat at the table, to learn and prepare as much as you can for challenges or as a business owner, opportunities that will come your way. So I think for successful owners, that can be to learn from board members, for instance, to learn from other business owners who have executed sales. We also always want to make sure that business owners and startup founders have the opportunity to learn from key players across the transaction table. We're going to talk a little bit about this probably later, but M&A advisors and IB professionals, all different types of advisors, so that as they're nearing exit, or even if they're really early on in the process, they sort of understand what those key levers are to maximize the proceeds from a potential transaction. Again, Own Your Worth, all about being prepared, using your assets like a business or real estate to help increase your impact and achieve those wealth goals, hopefully that, kind of span past you and also to your family, your employees, and your community.
Thank you, Bianca, and thank you for that personal story too. I think that ties it back even makes it more meaningful. Laura, leveraging your team's private practice expertise as former practicing estate planning attorneys, what has stood out to you the most when working with business owners and entrepreneurs that would be helpful for this audience to hear? Are there any fundamentals that are commonly overlooked that should be on a startup founder's radar?
Yes, I would say kind of the vast trend that I've seen is working with such bright people, so hardworking, and they're just kind of focused on the day to day. Or when they're doing more strategic planning, it usually has to do with just the business, and maybe long term feels like 6 months out or maybe a year. And often they have it somewhere on a list, but it's pushed down their own estate planning. And by that, I mean, even just a core basic estate plan. And that applies to business owners and sort of everybody else in the United States. You know, have you actually done that? You know, you might know you're sort of supposed to, you're not quite sure what that even means for you. Taking the time to engage with an attorney. We can also speak later to some of the online options. I'm happy to give my personal opinion on those. But going through that exercise and making sure that if something happens to you, whether that's death or incapacity, that you have checked the boxes. It also is a great introduction to some of the more, I'll call it sophisticated planning that you might do when some type of business exit is coming your way. And then kind of the hybrid approach that's also, I consider kind of a baseline that every business owner or someone who loves a business owner should be considering is there a business succession plan in place? Very often governing documents for entities have something in there, have a right of first refusal if one of the co-owners passes away. Make sure that you have actually taken a look at that and understand what it says. And do you like the sale and pricing terms that's in that? Is there proper insurance in place to actually fund that purchase if your co-founder passes away, so that you can purchase it back from their interest back from their family? So I would say that's kind of the baseline where you would hope every business owner has taken a look at that, but most often they haven't had a chance to prioritize it because they're just focused on other equally important day-to-day, just getting through it. But you know, taking that time, and that will also help you start to put your team in place for longer term planning as well. We can get into that in a little bit.
Sure. So bottom line, it's all important and we need to make time for it all. Could you talk to us a little more about the importance of timing and business succession planning?
Sure. And I know that Bianca will have all her insights on this as well. But, you know, a lot of what we talk about in my group when a financial advisor comes to us with a client who thinks they're going to go through an exit, sometimes they are going through the exit, or they're, you know, the IPO is right on the horizon, is there's so much more planning that you can do on the personal side, and really efficient tax planning, both from income tax and gift and estate tax. And just very quick overview, everybody is fortunately, unfortunately familiar with the income tax side of things. In the US on the federal level, we have an additional tax scheme, I'll call it transfer taxes, and primarily focused on gift tax if you give something away during your lifetime, and estate tax, which would apply when you pass away. Right now, that wouldn't apply unless you have more than about $13 million when you pass away. In a couple years, that number is actually scheduled to go down to 6 million. So if you have more than around 6 million, we start to worry about that because it's a 40% tax rate. Some states individually have their own either gift tax or estate tax as well. So when I'm talking about tax planning, we're not just focused on, gosh, do you live in New York or California or another state with really high income taxes? That might be a driving force before you sell your company. Are you wanting to move? Are you wanting to transfer some of your ownership into a trust that's outside of your high income tax state? But also, are you wanting to transfer some assets to try and save on those transfer taxes as well?
Thank you for your insights, Laura. Bianca.
Oh wait, I would love to. There's some. So Laura and I do a lot of work together, and something that she has said in the past, which I think is so compelling, is also that now is really an important time to consider from an estate planning perspective, from a business perspective, and from an M&A perspective. It's certainly a little bit of a more challenging market. However, having the opportunity to potentially have lower valuations or discounts right now make it like essentially the best time to do a lot of the planning. So from an urgency perspective, I would certainly say, you know, just kind of consider that now might be your best opportunity to do the plan.
Yeah, as Bianca said, it's kind of the silver lining to the state of the markets at the moment is if your goal is to transfer as much as you can to your descendants, let's say, actually having a lower valuation for your entity is very good from a transfer tax perspective, not as good from a sales proceeds perspective, but we're able to do more of that planning now from an estate planning and tax planning perspective when you have a lower value and doing it well in advance of an actual event. Kind of the triggering thing to keep in mind for all of this planning, whether it's something you're poised to do now or 5 years or 10 years from now, is kind of tuck away that once you sign a binding LOI or equivalent, a lot of the planning options disappear for a little bit. It doesn't mean you can't do anything, but a lot of kind of the most efficient and interesting planning that you might try and do really needs to happen before that. So it's not too early to at least get familiar with some of these topics. And if it's something where you're hoping in the next couple of years that you will see an exit, as Bianca said, now can be a really fantastic time to actually move on it. And I know we'll speak to this in a bit, but my group has issued a white paper, Personal Planning for Startup Founders, that really walks through almost a good timeline of things to consider from the planning front, including the importance of pre-liquidity, pre-IPO planning.
Thank you, ladies. So in terms of sales planning and hearing timing is everything, is there anything else other than what we just covered right now that you would highlight as challenges or any other opportunities in this environment for sale planning?
Sure. So I think kind of building on what we talked about, getting your team in place. And what does that mean, your team? You know, of course, we work with financial advisors. I am not a financial advisor, but I really do see the importance of getting a good financial advisor in place who can help you build a financial model for yourself, in addition to the team that you want in place for the business, of course. But how can you get to the answer of, can I afford to give something away to my kids and future grandkids or not? How do I know what I even need for my own life? What, you know, helping you think through, well, if you have great success, what would you want to buy? What's on that list, and kind of what do we have to play with from the planning side? So making sure that you have a good financial advisor who can help you develop and build that plan, in addition to a really great and sophisticated CPA, a really great and sophisticated estate planning attorney, and, you know, kind of returning to that idea of putting a core or basic estate plan in place, trying to engage with an attorney who is also equipped to help you with some more sophisticated planning down the road. They'll already be familiar with your thinking on particular topics and help you develop that as well.
So it's all about the team and the quality of the team.
All about the team. And it really does matter. And keeping in mind that it can take some time to build that
definitely.
team. And ideally you're finding folks who are also comfortable with each other, who can communicate with each other and really help support you in your efforts.
Awesome. B, anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. I will say that, you know, the cohesiveness that you mentioned of the team is very important. Sometimes a lot of people have a financial advisor take on the role of kind of the quarterback. And I think that's an important role because, you know, you have this longer term plan in place, you have these goals. And so you want everybody on that team to recognize and understand, you know, those goals very transparently. And then also somebody who can, you know, keep everybody accountable and make sure that all the decisions that are being made along the way help to kind of facilitate that. And especially if you're going to be going through a business sale transaction, you know, emotions are running high and there's so many things that, you have to get done. So you want to feel really familiar and have those trusted advisors in your court.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Bianca. I just want to pause briefly and ask Bree if there's a lot of questions coming in at this point.
Thank you. You know what? There are definitely a handful of questions. So I just pressed send on the email, but it has a bit of a delay. So I'm happy to just read them to you if you'd like me to do that right now.
Sure.
Okay, the first question is from a CEO of a startup focusing on cost cutting tech for retail showrooms. The point they make is that their innovation is a differentiator for the payments vertical, including buy now, pay later. Last month, a partnership was announced between Ingenico and Splitit. Is there a team at UBS currently looking at this development that you would suggest reaching out to in regard to alliances? So that might be that's a bit of a specific question. It'll definitely come to you over email if there's an answer to that one. Then there's a couple of more general questions.
Okay, we can definitely make some connection there. Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, fantastic. And this person has provided their email, so we'll make sure you get that.
Perfect.
There's also a question about an audience member would love to know if you'll share the white paper that was mentioned, that Laura mentioned. Okay, wonderful. Also, if you have recommendations for financial advisors. So not sure if you can do that, but if you can do that, we'll make sure to get that question to you as well. And then there's another question from an audience member saying, I'm hearing founders do not prioritize planning for, they frequently don't prioritize planning for the exit. So what can a startup founder do to start preparing? Is it never too early to conduct an evaluation for your company? So maybe at what point, like thinking of early
Good
stage
question.
founders, they start thinking.
Yeah.
And then once you're done with that, there is one final question, which I
Yes.
Thanks, Bree.
Absolutely. I will turn this over to Laura just to give us a sense of like how many months it takes for some of this stuff to get done. Because obviously we can do some of this in short order, but frankly, it's not in anybody's best interest to do that, right? Like taking a process that should essentially maybe last 18 months and shortening it down to 6 months is really tough. Again, I want to bring this back to the personal. So in a situation that I've been in, I think oftentimes in terms of transactions, the opportunity to sell comes sort of like unexpectedly, right? Like not to say that there aren't offers before, but maybe not offers that are compelling. And when a compelling offer lands in your lap, like you want to be able to move on that. So in a case that I've been in with my family, we kind of had a situation where there was an opportunity, we wanted to move on it. And we had conversations, I know exactly to the day 9 years prior, because that's when my first daughter was born, of what we potentially would want to do if we had an offer on the company. And at that time, we didn't even have our other 2 children, but we said, we really want to make sure that we're setting some liquidity aside for the kids, that it's in something that's income producing. So we just like sort of had this like framework in mind. And so when the opportunity came across the desk, we knew we wanted to move. There was a million things that had to get done, right? Like due diligence and figuring out what was our new household budget and what were things that should be moving around for us. And like the last thing that we wanted to have to think about was, what are the thousands of options that we potentially would have to leverage this money with, right? Like, what did we want to do with this liquidity? And so because we had kind of outlined what we wanted as a general goal for this money, it sort of like narrowed down what our choices were. And instead of having to review, 500 different options, we were able to review 5 and say, okay, this is the right path for us. And it just made things so much easier. I'll also say, in that moment, even myself, as somebody that does this for a living, nearly forgot to sign our updated will, including our third child. So, you know, if I'm doing this for clients all day, every day, and even I'm, you know, forgetting some things, thankfully we got it done 2 days before the sale closed. But, you know, look, it takes a team, and I needed somebody there that was going to be on my side to say, hey, don't forget to do this. We need to get some of this stuff done. So Laura, I don't know if you have any specifics in terms of some of the stuff that you've seen and maybe more of like that technical timeline.
Yeah, I would say, you know, you'll see some timelines where it's even 5 years prior, 3 years prior, and sometimes it just feels a little bit unrealistic because things can change a lot in that time span. But absolutely agree with you of, you know, start putting together your own vision of what you're hoping for, what that looks like, what you would plan with. I would say kind of more concrete information of what I've seen lately is qualified small business QSBS has become quite popular, and we've seen it present in many exits. I'm sure some of you are somewhat familiar with it, but it's on the federal level and some state levels, an actual exclusion of gain on sale. And it's either the greater of 10 million or 10 times your basis for a qualifying ownership. It has to be in a domestic C corporation or an entity taxed as a domestic C corporation, and check all of the other boxes. What are those other boxes? That's something that you should check with your CPA, and even early on when you're considering the structuring of your entity, even if you're sitting here and you're brand new and you formed as an LLC, which there can be great reasons to do that, talking with, and here really a qualified CPA and income tax attorney about a potential conversion and what the benefits would be potentially to doing that if you are really kind of marching towards the sale, because it's something where we'll see clients who were hoping they would get it, but through no fault of their own, maybe got some bad tax advice. It's a very technical area. It's also something where if it's present, you can do some really interesting estate planning to actually amplify that exclusion. So that's something that we find can also be very interesting to your initial investors as well, for them to qualify or roll some of their interest from a prior QSBS qualifying sale. So that's something where kind of right off the bat, in addition to your own core estate plan on the entity side, trying to check and see, is that something that you're going to go for? And if you're early enough, if you're interested in it, but you didn't qualify, taking the steps to try and convert into that.
Thank you both for those insights. Bree, do you have that last question that maybe we can address?
You know what, I do indeed. So there's a couple of questions that are kind of similar. So it boils down to, how can founders best grow their company with a view to exit? And, you know, how to be more attractive in the capital markets. And then kind of related, like, how can founders prepare their company for an exit in terms of financial reporting and due diligence?
Okay, I could probably just take most of that one. So I think in terms of attractiveness, right? I think you really want to think about your industry and about your potential buyer. A lot of venture-backed founders specifically, you know, I think once you take venture money, it's kind of like, well, that's now a business for sale, right? And I think it's really important that you're aligned in figuring out what are kind of your goals and milestones, what is your timeline for what you want to achieve, and making sure that the timeline for what you want to achieve and the goals for what you want to achieve are things that will be attractive to a potential acquirer or, you know, additional investors. And again, it will vary by industry. I will say a lot of our financial advisors get asked that question often, and they really want to kind of honestly make introductions for founders within that network, right? So maybe it is having a conversation with somebody on like a private markets one bank team, which we have at UBS, that can give them a sense of like what's really driving multiples and value now. What are some key trends that buyers are specifically looking for, so that you can align what you're doing on the business side with what you know a potential investor or buyer would be looking for. What was the second part of that question, if you don't mind?
No problem at all. The second part, how can founders prepare their company for an exit in terms of financial reporting and due diligence?
Yes. So look, I think organization is a huge part of that. Working with a really great accountant is important. And hopefully, to Laura's point, I think you want to make sure that maybe the accountant that you're working with can also potentially take you through a transaction. Not all accountants are able to do that or want to take that on. So I think it's something that you want to consider, because they'll be able to give you the expertise and get you really ready. So you have no due diligence periods that are easy, but sort of as clear and transparent financial documentation as possible. Laura, I don't know from your side if you have anything additional to add there.
Talking about the diligence period is giving me serious flashbacks to the start of my career and 3 a.m. diligence reviews and disclosures. No, I absolutely agree. It seems so silly to say, but record keeping and organization, because you can get behind it so quickly, especially when you're starting out, making sure that you have the team in place to help you with that. If you know that there's a hole, trying to fix it earlier. And yes, absolutely. I think that there are fantastic tax preparers for individuals right when they're starting out, who we see just kind of create problems down the line when they're not willing to say, this is a little bit outside of my area of expertise. So kind of having that honest check-in with the team that you started with, and are they equipped? Do they have other clients who have gone through what you're hoping to go through? And if not, seeing if you can really build out that team so they can help you identify the holes that might be present that you need to fix, so that, as Bianca said, sometimes you don't know when that opportunity is going to present itself, but making sure that you are in a better position if it does kind of drop into your lap, so you're not scrambling.
Thank you, ladies. I actually want to build on that and ask Bianca if you could share with us the core concepts of the latest book UBS sponsored, Exit Right, and how it aligns with this conversation and with our audience.
Yes, absolutely. So I think it's a little bit interesting. People were a little bit surprised that UBS sponsored a book called Exit Right. But it was written by two entrepreneurs who sold their companies. They really wanted to provide a resource for other founders who may be on a similar journey. And the authors, Mark Ackler and Mert Azeri, really try to share lessons that they personally learned and illuminate some insights from sort of all sides of the transaction table. So they do talk a lot to people on the investment banking and M&A side, but also to the transactional attorneys and accountants, and kind of, get everybody's war stories with a thought to better prepare an entrepreneur for what they're going to be going through. So through those kind of interviews and research, the Exit Right team identified 4 common elements that they felt really make for successful acquisitions. And they call it the FAIR framework. So it essentially comprises of elements that founders and acquirers should both focus on to maximize the value of a transaction. And FAIR actually stands for fit, alignment, integration, and rationale. You can kind of learn a little bit more about each of those areas within the book. But I think what's most important for this audience is that the role of the company's board and sort of what role that plays in. I think conventional wisdom is really that founders wouldn't, kind of virtually never really discuss exits, and certainly not too soon with shareholders or their board. And having gone through multiple sales themselves, and now sitting on the VC side, Mert and Mark kind of address having a conversation about the exit talk with your board as the first part of demystifying the whole exit process. And so they really suggest that you kind of clearly define a strategy so everybody is aligned years, frankly, prior to the event, and having, kind of making sure that founders are open with their board about potential exit options. I think, it doesn't always have to be a straight sale, right? I think you can keep a couple different options on the table, but being clear about, kind of what you're thinking, what your vision is, and also having other people from the board weigh in on that and what they think. Also, they kind of encourage founders to really adopt the practice of annually then revisiting this exit talk. Right, so at one board meeting a year, kind of in a similar way to how our financial advisors make a practice of addressing exit plans every year with founders. So you can kind of help address some of those evolving plans, those evolving timelines. I think the exit talk is just a really simple way to do a temperature check for everyone. And kind of make sure that from a long-term strategy perspective, and also a, potential strategic buyer, time horizon perspective, that you're all aligned. It also kind of, demystifies the process a little, allows the entrepreneur to build rapport, continue that sort of process of alignment, and establish a trust within the board that you need to really accomplish that fair deal.
Thank you for those insights and highlights, Bianca. I wanted to quickly turn it over to Laura and just ask, the advanced planning team recently published a white paper at the beginning of the year for startup founders. And everyone here will have access to it if they haven't received it already. What are one or two takeaways from the publication that you would like to highlight for our audience today?
Sure. I think that something we haven't had a chance to touch on today, and there's a great section in the white paper on it, is management of options. If you've received them, which is quite typical for venture-backed companies, and it falls into the record keeping, the number of times when a client is coming to us and saying, okay, we're looking at an event, I have some options. I say, okay, well, are they ISOs, NSOs? Do you really have RSUs? When do they vest? Have they already vested? Making sure that you have that information so that you can share it with your attorneys and CPAs to help you do some planning around that. And then on the earlier side, looking at your options for early exercise, 83B elections, there's no one rule about when that makes sense or doesn't, but you can have some really advantageous tax treatment down the line. So doing some kind of earlier than later personal planning around any options or similar grants that you have, getting your house in order on that front. I think the white paper is, 68 pages. So there's a lot of information in it. It's a really wonderful resource for kind of walking you through the different considerations at different times. I would say an additional thing that I would add on top of what's already in there is, if you're a calendar person like I am, put an annual reminder for yourself, estate planning and income tax planning check-in. Just so, you can see, did you address it like you were supposed to last year? If you did, do you still like the choices that you made in those documents? And then, specifically on the sales side, if you think, hey, I live in New York and I want to move out to avoid that level of tax, that takes time to do. You have to actually move, let's say, to Florida. We see that a common migration, if you have kids, where are you going to enroll them in school? You can't really just leave them behind in New York. You have to actually move for a lot of those types of income tax specific savings. So starting to really think about that and having that check-in to prompt you. The advantage of having a financial advisor is they will also bug you about this, but typically you won't see that an attorney or a CPA will necessarily have the bandwidth to be that driving force, but having, both on your personal side and potentially a financial advisor to help push you and keep you focused on that front.
Yeah, that's a really important point, Laura, because while accountants and attorneys, do this work all the time, they're not, they're paid to do the work that you ask them to do. Sometimes I will honestly say, like, is there anything we're missing? Anything that your other clients are doing or that you've seen in similar situations in the past, any opportunities that potentially we're missing out on. But it is really important. I think our financial advisors often play that role of saying, hey, I've gone down this road with so many clients that are in a similar situation to you. These are the questions that you need to ask. These are the things that you need to consider. You really just don't want to leave any stone unturned. I mean, it's a life-changing event. So you want to make sure that even though you may only have one chance to get it right, that you're like maximizing your opportunities within that transaction.
Thank you, ladies. I want to turn it over to Bree quickly and see if there's any other questions that maybe we can address here. And if not, if we run out of time, we can also follow up via email.
Thank you, Isabel. And by the way, I did manage to get these to you on time this time.
Awesome.
So if you want to ask the questions yourself, please feel free to do it. I'm also happy to do it.
Okay, let's see. Who should be on your team and any questions you'd recommend asking to find that great CPA? Any things to watch out for?
I'm gonna let you take that one, Laura.
Okay, yeah. So the team, and some of this is in the white paper, but like we said, sophisticated financial advisor who has had clients similar to you, a sophisticated CPA who has had clients similar to you, both on the personal side and on the business side, and that might be two different people. Potentially a sophisticated income tax attorney and a sophisticated estate planning attorney. There may be some others, I'm not even speaking necessarily to the business side and the investment banking team. But really, I would say exactly as Bianca just mentioned, do you have clients like me? Could I talk to them about what their experience was? Have you seen a company like mine with a successful exit? Have you seen one that didn't navigate this as well? What would you have told them if they had come to you earlier? Those types of things. I can just tell, I can think of a call that I was on at the end of last year with a client who had QSBS and their CPA kept giving them information. And I'm in a slightly awkward role where I am not technically to give tax and legal advice. And here is this person saying that they were the great expert. And I'm just having to delicately say, well, what we see for other clients is this. And he finally admitted after 3 different phone calls that he had never actually dealt with QSBS before. And so we kind of gently after the fact had to say to the client, you might consider, I'm not in the role of trying to have anyone lose their job, but for that client, it would have cost them literally tens of millions of dollars on the exit. So also making sure you're working with someone who will admit if it's outside of their area of expertise so that you can then bring in somebody who has done it. We can, for our clients, we are always happy to give a handful of names in each of those categories. So whoever you work with, be sure and interview a few different options. And some of it will come down to personality as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's absolutely true too. You want somebody who, you are going to feel good about being in the trenches with. Yeah. It's a grueling few months. And then also, I think to your point, you want people that are going to work together well as a team. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it can be very advantageous to ask your trusted financial advisor, like, who do you think? This is the person that I'm using now. I'm not feeling like they're giving me what I need. Who do you think? Who have you gone through these successful transactions with before? What does that team look like? And oftentimes they can bring together the pieces. So just again, one last thing that you have to worry about.
Yeah. Thank you, Lee. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, one last thing, because it just came to mind, but
please,
making sure that your corporate attorney and your estate planning attorney are aware that you might be doing things. Because, for example, if you transfer some ownership into an irrevocable trust for your kids, and that trust will now participate as a seller of the business, the corporate attorney needs to know that, needs to disclose it, needs to make sure that there are proper carve outs in the, let's say, LOI to allow for that transfer. So just making sure, you know, a lot of this planning becomes quite typical, but it can be a very frantic time, especially depending on what timeline we're looking at. So making sure that people are talking to each other, and it might be on you, definitely, you know, helps to have that quarterback again, and potentially financial advisor or whoever else that manifests in, but making sure that in that kind of jam-packed time that people are pausing to take a breath and say, you know, did we remember that really XYZ is also going on?
Such good advice. Thank you both. And thank you, Bree, for sending over the questions. There's still a few more here, but I'd like to be respectful of everyone's time. We'll get back we'll answer those questions and get back to you via email. But I want to turn it over to Bree now and to close it off for us.
Well, thank you so much. And really what I have to say to bring it home is just thank you for the time and providing all of these really thoughtful, detailed responses. And thank you also to the attendees for so many amazing questions.